There are names the daylight has forgotten, and they lie buried in the folds of history where silence is thicker than stone. But tonight, I will tell their stories. The pages of the past were written by kings, by generals, by voices that shouted loud enough to drown out all others. Yet in the margins, in the shadows, there remain whispers. Whispers of lives that defied their age, that burned brighter than the world would allow. Tonight, 3 of those voices return. A woman who crossed Paris with a rapier in her hand and fire in her song. A woman who faced the darkness of empire with nothing but a hidden radio and an unbroken will. And a queen who stood against centuries of conquest, her crown heavy with defiance, her throne carved out of resistance. They lived in different times, on different continents, under different skies, and yet they are bound by a single thread. The thread of those who were too dangerous to be remembered, too bold to be written in the lines of official history. I am the Watcher, and this is what the world tried to forget. So let us step carefully now into Paris, a city where the night glows with candlelight, where music and steel share the same stage, and where one woman's story begins with both a song and a duel. The first woman to be rescued from the silence of history was born in France beneath the shadow of the Sun King. Her name was Julie d'Aubigny. She entered the world in the late 17th century, in a time when women were expected to bow their heads, to move quietly through life as shadows behind men. But Julie was no shadow. She was fire. Her father trained the king's pages in the art of the sword, and while other girls were handed needles and lace, Julie was given steel. She learned the rapier as though it were an extension of her own hand. By 15, she fought with the grace of a soldier, but her spirit longed for more than duels. She longed for song. She stepped onto the stage of Parisian opera houses, her voice filling gilded halls, her presence radiant, untamed. Yet where others lived one life, Julie lived many. In the light of the stage, she was an enchantress. In the dark of night, she was a duelist, crossing blades with noblemen who mocked her and defeating them. Her lovers were many. Her scandals whispered in every corner of Paris. When she fell in love with a young woman locked away in a convent, Julie did not hesitate. She disguised herself, infiltrated the convent, and when discovered, she set the building aflame as they fled together into the night. It was madness. It was devotion. It was Julie.
Exiled, hunted, she wandered through France, surviving by her sword and her song. She defeated men in duels across the countryside, earning both infamy and admiration. She was invited back to Paris, where her voice once more conquered the opera stage. Kings and nobles listened in awe, yet they also feared her name, whispered like a curse and a prayer alike. Her life was brief, burning as fast as the flame she once set. She died before the age of 40, leaving behind no monument, no kingdom, only a trail of duels and songs, a storm pressed into the memory of those who had seen her. Julie d'Aubigny was a woman too vast for her century, too dangerous to be remembered in comfort, and so history tried to bury her. The second woman we rescue from the silence of history was born not in shadows, but in light. A palace in Moscow, 1914. Snow fell against tall windows, and within a child was born to music and mysticism. Her name was Noor Inayat Khan. She was the daughter of an Indian Sufi master, a teacher of peace and poetry, and an American mother who filled the home with stories. Her childhood was a tapestry of two worlds, East and West, mysticism and reason, silence and song. When war darkened Europe, Noor was no longer a child. She fled Paris with her family as the Nazi storm swallowed France. But unlike many who escaped, she chose to return. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with a radio, the most dangerous tool of resistance.
She became the first female wireless operator sent into occupied France by the British. Her code name was Madeline. Every signal she sent was a whisper of defiance, each message a spark in the dark. But the Gestapo were listening. Day by day, they hunted the invisible pulse of her radio. Her comrades were captured, executed. She was offered the chance to leave, but she refused. She stayed, knowing the walls of Paris were closing in. One night, betrayal. She was seized, her radio silenced. For months, she endured interrogation and torture. Her captors demanded names, networks, the map of the resistance. She gave them nothing, only silence, only defiance. In 1944, she was taken to Dachau. The morning air was cold, the walls damp with cruelty. Yet even then, her voice did not break. Her final word, moments before her execution, was the same word she had carried all along: liberté. Her body was silenced, but her echo remained. In 1949, France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. Britain honored her with the George Cross. Yet outside of metals and stone, she lingers not as a soldier, nor as a martyr, but as a signal that still waits somewhere in the static, whispering through the wires of history. The third woman we bring back from the silence of history did not walk among candlelit palaces or gilded opera halls. Her story was written beneath the burning skies of Africa, carved in dust and blood. Her name was Nzinga Mbande, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba. The year was 1583. Angola's rivers cut through kingdoms already trembling under the shadow of empire. The Portuguese had arrived with iron chains and cannons, building forts along the coast, dragging captives into the belly of ships bound for distant markets. Whole villages vanished overnight. Yet, in the midst of this storm, Nzinga was born into a royal line, a child of fire, destined to stand against centuries. From her youth, she was no ordinary princess. While other daughters of kings were groomed for marriage alliances, Nzinga studied diplomacy and strategy. She learned the rhythm of politics like a second heartbeat,
the art of deception, of patience, of seizing a single word and turning it into a weapon sharper than steel. But she also trained her body for war. She rode horses, mastered the spear, and learned to command. Years later, when her brother faltered before Portuguese demands, Nzinga was sent as his emissary. In 1622, she entered Luanda, a city heavy with colonial arrogance. The governor, seated in power, offered her no chair, forcing her to stand, a gesture meant to humiliate. But Nzinga did not bow. Instead, she turned to one of her attendants, who lowered himself to the ground. She sat upon his back, her eyes fixed level with the governor's. The room froze. She had declared, without a word, that no empire would ever tower above her. When negotiations failed, she chose the path of war. For decades, Nzinga fought against the Portuguese armies and their allies. She forged new alliances, even with former enemies, and welcomed runaway slaves and deserters into her ranks, turning her kingdom into a fortress of the free. On the battlefield, she was both commander and symbol. She rode at the head of her armies well into her 60s, dressed in armor, spear gleaming in the sun. The Portuguese feared her not only for her armies, but for her mind, her ability to turn defeat into endurance, exile into resurgence, silence into a weapon. She was more than a queen. She was the living proof that empires could bleed. Nzinga ruled for nearly 40 years. She transformed her kingdom into a sanctuary for the hunted, a stronghold that Portugal never truly conquered. And when death finally came, in her 80s, it was not in chains or in exile, but on her throne, sovereign until the end. Her story is not carved in marble, nor gilded in European chronicles. It survives in the memory of a people, in the bloodline of resistance itself. Nzinga Mbande was not merely a ruler. She was a storm, a flame, a crown that refused to fall. They were three women separated by centuries, by continents, by the weight of their worlds. A duelist who sang louder than fear. A spy who carried freedom in the silence between radio signals. And a queen who stood unbroken before an empire. Each lived a life that burned too fiercely for their time, and so history tried to hide them in its margins. But the past is not as silent as it pretends to be. If you listen carefully, the forgotten still speak. And now, I will leave the silence to you. Which of these women's stories should the world remember most? Tell me in the comments below. And if you wish to keep walking with me through the shadows of history, subscribe to this channel. I am the Watcher, and this is what the world tried to forget.